A quiet evening on a bustling city square takes a dark turn when a young boy's heartfelt performance is met with unexpected hostility. But just when things seem hopeless, an extraordinary act changes everything. Who will stand up for justice? Watch till the end to witness the powerful moment that left everyone speechless. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The city square buzzed with life as people moved between shops, vendors, and food stands. In the midst of the evening bustle, a 10-year-old black boy sat cross-legged on the ground near the edge of the square. He was dressed in worn clothes, his shoes were tattered, and his small figure seemed almost lost among the towering adults rushing by. Despite his appearance, his expression radiated focus and determination as he played a soft, melodic tune on an old flute. The instrument was his most cherished possession, a gift from his late mother, a constant reminder of her love and the dreams she had for him. His music, though simple, carried a heartfelt sincerity that caught the attention of passers-by. Some slowed their steps to listen, and a few tossed coins or small bills into a cardboard box beside him. Written on the box, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Playing for food and my dream to become a musician." The boy's fingers moved nimbly across the flute, coaxing out a gentle melody that floated through the air. It was a melody his mother had taught him, one that she had always hummed to soothe him when times were tough. As he played, the boy kept his gaze lowered, both out of shyness and to avoid the disapproving looks from a few people who passed without stopping. He didn't notice the two police officers approaching from the opposite end of the square. They walked briskly, their heavy boots thudding against the pavement, their expressions stern. One was tall with a cold, piercing gaze, while the other was stocky and carried a perpetual scowl. The boy's music reached their ears as they neared, and they exchanged a glance that carried an unspoken decision. Without hesitation, they made their way toward him. The boy stopped playing as the shadow of the tall officer fell over him. He looked up, clutching the flute tightly in his small hands. The officer's voice was sharp and loud, cutting through the air and silencing the nearby crowd. "What do you think you're doing here, kid?" the officer demanded. "This isn't the place for begging." The boy hesitated, his voice soft but steady. "I'm not begging, sir. I'm just playing music." The stocky officer laughed harshly, crossing his arms. "Playing music? This racket you're making is hardly music. You're just trying to scam people for money." "I'm not scamming anyone," the boy said, his grip tightening on the flute. "I just want to eat. And maybe save for lessons someday." His quiet response only seemed to fuel the officer's disdain. The tall one sneered and gestured at the cardboard box. "Save for lessons. You think this is going to make you some kind of star? Let me tell you something, kid. You're wasting your time." The boy didn't respond. He lowered his gaze again, focusing on the flute in his hands. His silence seemed to infuriate the officers even more. The stocky one stepped forward, his heavy boot kicking the cardboard box. Coins and bills scattered across the pavement, drawing gasps from a few onlookers who had stopped to watch. "Oops," he said mockingly, spreading his arms. "Looks like your little operation's been busted." The boy scrambled to gather the scattered money, but the tall officer grabbed him by the collar, yanking him to his feet. "You're done here, kid. Pack it up and leave." The boy winced but refused to cry out. "Please," he said quietly. "I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just playing." "Not hurting anyone?" The tall officer's voice rose. "You're breaking the law, that's what you're doing. This square isn't for the likes of you." The stocky officer smirked and added, "Maybe he needs a lesson in respect." Without warning, they dragged the boy toward a nearby lamppost. The crowd, which had grown larger, murmured uneasily, but no one stepped forward. Some recorded the scene on their phones, while others turned away, unwilling to get involved. The boy struggled, but he was no match for the two men. They tied his wrists behind his back with a plastic zip tie and fastened him to the lamppost. One of them tugged at his worn pants, pulling them down to his knees, leaving him exposed in his undergarments. Laughter echoed from the stocky officer, but the boy kept his head high. "Look at him now," the tall officer announced loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. "Think you're some kind of musician, huh? How's this for your big performance?" The boy's cheeks burned with humiliation, but he didn't let the tears that threatened to fall escape. Instead, he squared his shoulders, his voice steady as he spoke. "You can do what you want of me, but I'm not going to let you break me. I'm still a person, even if you don't think so." His words silenced the laughter for a brief moment. The tall officer's face darkened with anger, and he reached for his baton. "You little—" He raised the baton, ready to strike. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but before the baton could descend, a hand caught it mid-swing. The tall officer froze, his eyes widening as he turned to see a towering figure standing behind him. John Cena stood there, his grip firm on the officer's wrist, his expression a mask of calm authority. His voice was deep and steady as he said, "That's enough." The square fell silent as John Cena's firm grip on the officer's wrist froze him in place. The baton remained mid-air, trembling slightly in the officer's hand as he struggled against John's unyielding strength. John's calm but commanding voice cut through the tension. "This ends now," he said, his gaze locked on the tall officer's angry eyes. The stocky officer stepped forward, his voice rising in defiance. "And who the hell do you think you are? Let him go or you'll regret it." John turned his head slightly, his gaze shifting to the second officer. "I'm someone who doesn't stand by while people abuse their power. Untie the boy and apologize to him." The tall officer yanked his wrist free from John's grasp, his face twisting with indignation. "Apologize? To this little punk? He's the one breaking the law, and now you're interfering with law enforcement? I suggest you back off before you find yourself in cuffs too." John straightened to his full height, towering over both officers. His voice remained steady. "I've been watching from the start. That boy hasn't done anything wrong. He's playing music, not hurting anyone. What you're doing is harassment, plain and simple." The crowd began murmuring, emboldened by John's presence. Phones were raised, cameras rolling, as people recorded the standoff. The tall officer glanced around, his unease growing as he noticed the growing number of witnesses. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back down. "You're out of your depth, Cena. This isn't a wrestling ring, and you're not in charge here." John's eyes narrowed, his calm demeanor giving way to a sharper tone. "You're right. This isn't a ring, it's real life, where people like you are supposed to protect the innocent, not torment them. If you think I'm going to walk away, you've got another thing coming." The stocky officer, frustrated by John's defiance, lunged forward, aiming to shove him back. John sidestepped effortlessly, his movement smooth and calculated. The officer stumbled but quickly regained his balance, pulling out his baton. "You want to play hero? Fine. Let's see how tough you really are." The tall officer followed suit, pulling his baton and circling John. The crowd gasped as the confrontation escalated. The boy, still tied to the lamppost, watched with wide eyes, His breath quickened with a mix of fear and hope. The first officer swung his baton at John's torso, but John blocked it with his forearm, the sound of the impact echoing sharply. Without missing a beat, he grabbed the officer's arm and twisted it, forcing the baton to clatter to the ground. A quick, controlled motion sent the officer sprawling to the pavement with a thud. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The second officer hesitated, then charged, his baton raised high. John ducked under the swing and countered with a powerful shoulder tackle, sending the officer staggering backward into a bench. The officer groaned, clutching his ribs as he tried to recover. The tall officer, now furious and humiliated, reached for his radio, but John stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't even think about it. This stops now. Let the boy go." The officer hesitated, his hand hovering over his radio, before his frustration boiled over. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Suddenly, the stocky officer, now recovered, reached for his holster and began to pull out his firearm. The crowd screamed in panic, some backing away while others shouted warnings. But before the weapon was fully drawn, a commanding voice boomed across the square. "Enough!" The crowd parted as a tall, authoritative man in a police chief's uniform approached, flanked by two other officers. His stern expression left no room for argument as he marched toward the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" The stocky officer froze, his hand still on his weapon, and the tall officer stiffened, his face pale. "Chief, this man, he interfered with an arrest," the tall officer stammered, gesturing at John. The police chief's piercing gaze swept over the scene, taking in the tied-up boy, the scattered coins on the ground, and the two disheveled officers. He turned to John, who stood calm and steady amidst the chaos. "Mr. Cena, care to explain?" John stepped forward, his tone measured but firm. These officers were harassing this boy. He was playing music and hurting no one, but they tied him up, humiliated him, and were about to use unnecessary force. I stepped in to stop them. The police chief's eyes narrowed as he looked at the officers. "Is this true?" he demanded. The tall officer stammered. "Chief, he was disrupting the square, breaking the law." "Enough," the chief snapped, cutting him off. He gestured to the other officers who had arrived with him. "Untie the boy." The officers moved quickly, cutting the ties and helping the boy down. He stood shakily, clutching his torn clothes and broken flute. The chief crouched down to his level, his tone softening. "Are you all right, son?" The boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir." The chief straightened and turned back to the two officers. "You've both disgraced this uniform and abused your power. You're suspended immediately, pending an investigation. Get out of my sight." The disgraced officers hesitated before retreating, their heads bowed in shame. The crowd erupted into cheers as the boy was finally free. The chief turned to John, extending his hand. "Thank you for stepping in. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." John shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for doing the right thing." As the crowd began to disperse, John knelt beside the boy. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Marcus," the boy replied, his voice still shaky. John smiled. "You were brave out there, Marcus. Never let anyone take your dignity from you." Marcus managed a small smile, his grip tightening on his broken flute. "Thank you." John stood and patted his shoulder. "Stay strong, kid. You've got a lot of people rooting for you." The square was quieting down, but the memory of what had happened would linger. For Marcus, it was a moment of humiliation turned into a lesson in courage. For the crowd, it was a reminder that standing up for what's right can make all the difference. As the two disgraced officers disappeared from view, the square began to shift back to normalcy, though an air of awe and gratitude lingered among the crowd. People whispered among themselves, recounting the events and praising John Cena's actions. Marcus stood near the lamp post, his small frame still trembling as he clutched the broken flute in his hands. His pants, hastily pulled back up, were still dirty and torn, a physical reminder of the humiliation he had endured. The chief of police remained, speaking with the officers who had arrived as backup, ensuring that the situation was fully under control. John knelt down to Marcus's level, his voice gentle. "Marcus, are you sure you're okay?" The boy looked up at him, his large brown eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. I think so," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the murmurs of the crowd. John noticed how tightly Marcus held the damaged flute. The once beautiful instrument, a cherished keepsake from his mother, now bore cracks and scratches, its delicate form bent from the officer's abuse. "Is this important to you?" John asked, nodding toward the flute. Marcus nodded, his grip tightening even further. "It was my mom's. She taught me how to play. It's all I have left of her." John felt a pang in his chest. He reached out, resting a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I'm sorry they did this to you, but your strength out there, you didn't let them take your dignity. Your mom would be proud of you." Marcus's lip quivered, but he didn't let the tears fall. Instead, he straightened his back slightly, drawing strength from John's words. Around them, members of the crowd began to step forward, some offering Marcus small donations, others words of encouragement. A man in a business suit crouched down and placed a crisp bill into Marcus's hand. "For your music lessons," the man said with a kind smile before walking away. The chief of police approached. His stern demeanor softened as he addressed Marcus. "Son, I want to apologize on behalf of the police department. What happened to you tonight was wrong. Those officers will be held accountable for their actions, and this will never happen again." Marcus looked up at him, his expression uncertain. "You mean they won't hurt anyone else?" The chief nodded firmly. "That's right. And if anyone tries, you tell someone. There are good people out there who will stand up for you, like Mr. Cena here." Marcus glanced at John, his eyes now showing a spark of hope. "He's the strongest person I've ever seen." John chuckled softly. "It's not about strength, Marcus. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." The crowd began to disperse, but a few people lingered, including a young woman who had filmed the entire incident on her phone. She approached Marcus and John, showing them the video. "This is going viral already," she said, her tone filled with excitement. "People need to see what happened here. They need to know that bravery like yours exists." Marcus stared at the screen, watching himself standing tall even as the officers mocked and humiliated him. For a moment, he saw himself not as a helpless child, but as someone who had endured and overcome. The realization brought a faint smile to his face. John gently patted Marcus's shoulder. "Your story is going to inspire a lot of people, but more importantly, you've inspired everyone here tonight." The police chief cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "We'll make sure Marcus gets home safely, and we'll arrange for counseling if he needs it. No child should have to go through what he did." Marcus looked down at the broken flute in his hands and then back up at John. "I don't have a home," he admitted quietly. "I just stay where I can." The admission silenced everyone around him for a moment. John's jaw tightened as he looked at the boy, his protective instincts kicking in. "That changes now," he said firmly. "We'll figure something out." One of the onlookers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. "I run a shelter nearby," she said. "We can take him in for now, give him a safe place to stay." Marcus hesitated, glancing at John. "Will you come see me?" he asked, his voice small. John smiled warmly. "Of course I will. We're friends now, right?" Marcus's face lit up with a grin, the first genuine smile he'd shown all evening. "Yeah, friends." The woman gently placed a hand on Marcus's back, guiding him toward the shelter. The crowd slowly began to thin out, leaving John standing alone in the square. He watched as Marcus disappeared into the night, surrounded by newfound safety and support. John exhaled deeply, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The boy's resilience had left a profound impact on him, reminding him of the power of standing up for others. As he turned to leave, the sound of Marcus's voice calling out stopped him. "Thank you," Marcus shouted from a distance, his voice echoing through the now quiet square. John turned back, raising a hand in acknowledgement. "Any time, Marcus," he said softly to himself before walking away. The square, once filled with chaos and fear, now carried the quiet weight of a victory for justice and humanity. The next morning, the events of the previous night had spread across social media like wildfire. Videos of John Cena stepping in to defend Marcus and standing up to the abusive officers were trending on multiple platforms. The hashtags #JusticeForMarcus and #StandWithSena filled timelines, accompanied by messages of outrage over the officer's actions and admiration for John's bravery. News outlets picked up the story, drawing attention to the mistreatment of a homeless child and the systemic issues it highlighted. Marcus, who had spent the night at the local shelter, awoke to a very different world from the one he had known just a day before. At the shelter, Marcus sat in the dining area, his broken flute lying on the table in front of him. The shelter's staff and a few other children watched the news coverage, their faces filled with a mix of anger and hope. Marcus listened quietly as the reporter described how the incident had sparked calls for accountability within the local police department. He felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude for John, embarrassment from the humiliation he'd endured, and a flicker of pride that his story was making people care. The shelter director, a kind woman named Mrs. Harper, approached him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, there's someone here to see you," she said with a warm smile. Marcus turned toward the door, his heart leaping as he saw John Cena step into the room. Dressed casually, John carried a small case in one hand and an easygoing smile on his face. "Mornin', Marcus," John said, walking over and setting the case on the table. "I figured you might want this." Marcus's eyes widened as John opened the case to reveal a brand new flute, its polished silver surface gleaming in the light. "I couldn't fix the one they broke," John explained, "but I thought this might be a good replacement." Marcus stared at the flute, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch it. You got this for me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. John nodded. "You've got talent, Marcus. You shouldn't lose that because of what happened. Keep playing and keep chasing your dream." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he lifted the flute from the case. He brought it to his lips and played a soft, tentative melody. The sound was pure and clear, filling the room with a sense of renewal. The shelter staff and children clapped and cheered, their applause echoing off the walls. As Marcus finished the tune, he lowered the flute and looked up at John, his face glowing with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you enough." "You just did," John replied, ruffling Marcus's hair. "But there's one more thing I wanted to talk to you about." He pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a video of the incident from the previous night. "This is everywhere now. People are watching and they're listening. Your story is inspiring a lot of people. How do you feel about that?" Marcus hesitated, his fingers tracing the keys of the flute. "It's strange," he admitted. "I didn't think anyone cared about me before." "Well, they do now," John said firmly, "and this is your chance to show them what you're capable of. You're not just a kid with a flute anymore, you're a symbol of strength. You've got a voice, Marcus, and people are ready to hear it." Mrs. Harper stepped in, her smile full of pride. "Marcus, we've already had people calling to offer help. Donations are coming in, and a local music school has offered you a scholarship if you're interested." Marcus's eyes widened. "A scholarship? You mean I can go to school and learn music for real?" "That's right," Mrs. Harper said. "This is your chance to make your dream come true." The room buzzed with excitement as the other children cheered for Marcus. Overwhelmed, he looked at John. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. John crouched to meet Marcus at eye level. "You take it one step at a time. Accept the help people are offering you. Go to that school, learn everything you can, and never stop believing in yourself. You've already proven how strong you are. Now it's time to show the world your talent." Marcus nodded, a determined smile breaking across his face. "I'll do it. I'll make my mom proud." "You already have," John said, standing up. He turned to Mrs. Harper. "If Marcus needs anything, let me know. I'll help however I can." "Thank you, Mr. Cena," she replied. "Your support means the world to him and to all of us." As John prepared to leave, Marcus followed him to the door, the new flute still clutched tightly in his hands. "Will you come see me again?" Marcus asked, his voice hopeful. "Of course," John said with a grin. "We're friends now, remember?" Marcus beamed. "Yeah, friends." John gave him a quick pat on the shoulder before heading out. As he walked away, he couldn't help but smile, knowing that Marcus's life was beginning to change for the better. For the first time, the boy had a real chance at a brighter future, and John was proud to have played a part in making it happen. The sound of Marcus's new flute followed him as he left the shelter, a melody filled with hope and promise for what was yet to come. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's life transformed in ways he had never imagined. The viral video of the incident in the square continued to circulate, drawing attention from people across the country. Donations poured into the shelter, not just for Marcus, but for other children in need as well. Community leaders, inspired by Marcus's resilience and the outcry for justice, began advocating for reforms to ensure that abuse of power, like what he endured, would not go unchecked again. Marcus started attending the local music school that had offered him a scholarship. Walking into the school on his first day, clutching his new flute, he felt nervous but also excited. The hallways were filled with the sound of instruments, and for the first time, Marcus felt like he truly belonged somewhere. His instructors were impressed by his natural talent and determination, and they encouraged him to explore his musical potential. John Cena kept his promise and visited Marcus regularly. On one of those visits, John brought a small audience of his own, several of his celebrity friends who were inspired by Marcus's story. Together, they cheered Marcus on as he performed his first recital at the school, a heartfelt rendition of the song his mother had taught him. The applause was thunderous, and Marcus beamed, feeling his mother's presence with every note he played. The police department also underwent changes. The officers involved in the incident were formally charged and dismissed from their positions, while the chief introduced new policies to ensure accountability and transparency. The community, moved by Marcus's story, began rallying around him as a symbol of hope and change. The square where the incident had occurred was renamed Harmony Plaza, in honor of Marcus's bravery and his commitment to bringing people together through music. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Marcus returned to the square with John. The crowd that had gathered was much larger this time, filled with families, children, and supporters who had followed his journey. Marcus stood in the center, holding his flute, while John stood beside him, offering a reassuring nod. Marcus addressed the crowd, his voice clear and steady. "I used to think that no one cared about me or what I had to say. But now I know that there are people who will stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Mr. Cena showed me that, and because of him and all of you, I'm here today to play my music and share my story." The crowd erupted into applause as Marcus brought the flute to his lips. The melody he played was one of hope, resilience, and unity. It echoed through the square, filling every corner with a sense of renewal and purpose. John stood nearby, his arms crossed, a proud smile on his face as he watched Marcus shine. After the performance, Marcus stepped down from the small stage and joined John, who gave him a firm pat on the back. "You nailed it, Marcus," John said. "Your mom would be so proud of you." Marcus looked up at him, his smile radiant. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." John crouched to meet his gaze. "You did this, Marcus. You stood tall when it mattered most. I was just there to remind you of the strength you already had." As the evening turned to night, Marcus and John walked through the square together, their bond as strong as ever. Marcus's music had not only changed his life but also inspired a community to stand up for justice and kindness. For Marcus, the future no longer felt uncertain. With John by his side as a friend and mentor, and with the support of so many others, he was ready to take on the world, one note at a time. What happened today is a reminder that standing up for what's right can change lives. How would you have reacted in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, and share it with your friends to spread the message.